Good afternoon. Welcome to this latest episode of the Pandemic Podcast with me, Astin-Gregory. Where do we go from here is the question I seek to address in this very latest episode. Here we are still broadcasting under the title of the Pandemic Podcast, despite the fact that it seemed as though COVID-19 disappeared almost overnight as the news headlines shifted from COVID-19 to the conflict in Ukraine, as the world witnessed what was the potential end of one global crisis and the beginning of a next. However, already this week, we are now seeing stories about COVID-19 creeping back into the headlines, with increases in cases reported across the UK, stories of yet new variants. What is going on? And quite frankly, where do we go from here? This is the focus of our conversation tonight here on the Pandemic Podcast. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the news stories around COVID. The pandemic, is it over or is it not? Despite being out of the headlines, in the UK, there's been a 50% plus increase in cases over the last 7 days, with some hospitalizations all on the rise in tandem. Certainly not at the same rate. And this, for once, is not attributed to a significant rise in cases, tests rather. But it must be said that still in the United Kingdom, still churning out 500,000 to 700,000 tests per day, with the ONS, the Office of National Statistics report, coming out suggesting that 1 in 25 people are currently infected. This is now being largely attributed to a subvariant of Omicron called BA.2. It's now thought to be the most common strain in most of the UK, although the ONS are saying it's too early to determine what's behind the rise in cases. But some scientists are saying that it's the increased transmissibility of BA.2, the recent easing of restrictions, and waning immunity from the vaccines all being factors. As such, an extra vaccine booster is currently being offered this spring to people over 75. Yes, that's a fourth dose to over 75 care home residents and the most vulnerable individuals over the age of 12 being called to top up their vaccinations. And these groups will be invited to have boosters every 6 months after their latest vaccination. Now, the topic of vaccination is obviously one of much controversy, and in fact, there has been somewhat recent coverage of the impact of adverse reactions and even the impact on insurance claims and compensation claims. This subject we are going to cover in much more depth on Monday, still under the guise of the Pandemic Podcast. And I say under the guise of the Pandemic Podcast because we are trying to move away from the pandemic conversation. But still, here we are, 2 years on, in fact, approaching the anniversary of the first lockdown in the United Kingdom, the 2-year anniversary of the first lockdown coming up. We'll do a happy anniversary special when we hit that date. But of course, despite the fresh headlines around the Ukraine and Russia dominating the headlines, there was a story around the number of people in Scottish hospitals is at its highest level in the last 13 months, which is higher than the past peak in January. And healthcare boards in Scotland are saying far fewer people needing intensive care. However, the large number of COVID patients are affecting the availability of beds and other services, the usual stories. Now, the important thing to recognize about this is the nature of policy here, because it's, as we've discussed here numerous times on the Pandemic Podcast, the way in which a COVID patient is categorized is simply someone who has tested positive in the past 28 days or upon admission, and therefore categorized as a COVID patient and treated as such within the wards. So it's that policy around how COVID patients are treated that is a bigger problem. And in fact, nearly 12,000 people the close to 12,000 people who are currently in UK hospitals with the positive tests, data suggests that the majority of these patients are actually being treated for something else other than COVID-19 itself. Now, if you're hearing this for the first time thinking, Dan, that doesn't make sense, well, quite frankly, this is how the whole situation has been run for the last 2 years. So I'll repeat what I said, that the 12,000 people in the UK who have tested positive with COVID and as such considered COVID patients, the majority of them have been treated as something other than COVID. This is the nature of the beast when it's come to the statistical flaws. I know I sound like a stuck record, but you've got to keep saying these things until people realize the whole thing is an absolute mess. So yes, headlines, cases increasing, hospitalizations increasing, but it seems to be really creating quite a low dent in terms of its overall healthcare impacts, fortunately. And good news is that the mortality is still very low. However, despite this spread of the new subvariant BA2, we're now hearing about Deltacron. Deltacron, a hybrid, or so it seems, derived from the Delta variant. The scientists are saying the backbone of the variant is derived from the Delta variant, where the spike is the part which attaches itself to the human cells, is from Omicron, hence Deltacron. If you thought that you couldn't get more, sound more like a science fiction or a character from Transformers than Omicron, well, Deltacron takes us a new step forward. This is what's known as a recombinant virus. They emerge where patients are infected with two variants of a virus at the same time, and combination occurs when its cells replicate together. This is pretty common within viruses. However, there is a bit of a backstory to this one because when this Deltacron variant was discovered on the 7th of January with a televised announcement following its discovery with a research group in the University of Cyprus, it was then named as Deltacron. The team from the university in Cyprus uploaded 25 of the sequences to the public repository for analysis, and another 27 sequences a few days later. Then Bloomberg, the media, picked up on this story. Deltacron then early January became initial news. Some of you may remember that. And the response to the scientific community was then swift. However, what was very interesting is that many scientists went on to declare across social media, the laboratory of science, the public laboratory of science, many scientists declaring out loud on social media that these sequences did not point to a new variant and were not the result of recombination, but were probably a result of contamination in the laboratory. This is what was going on in January. So much so that a member of the WHO's own COVID-19 technical team went on the 9th of January to say that Omicron, and conclusively off the back of this, that Omicron and Delta did not form a supervariant, and that there was whole articles around scientific misinformation and debunking this new variant. This was at the beginning of January. Well, of course, now all of that bluster has now led to the WHO actually saying that Deltacron indeed does exist and that it is a recombination of two viruses. So all of that debunking, describing it of misinformation, was later now confirmed. And in fact, on the 9th of March, the WHO briefing just 2 days ago stated that the cases of this variant had been discovered in the Netherlands and in Denmark. Now, I just want to point this out on the basis how ridiculous the whole situation is, from the way we categorize cases not necessarily requiring symptoms, the fact that we categorize hospitalizations, but also the ludicrous nature in which things have been covered. And, you know, we keep seeing these stories debunked, you know, debunked that the origin of the virus is all of these different pieces that have become controversial over the course of the last 2 years, still continuing. So a reminder to you that this is something, the chaos around this is something we need to keep a close eye upon. And importantly to recognize, even though in the United Kingdom, certainly within England, we have seen the back of the majority of the restrictions, there are still a few minor things in place, as well as a mindset that follows. But there is still ongoing issues around the world with restrictions, emergency legislation, mandates. And of course, all the issues surrounding vaccines, the issues surrounding the suppression of treatments. These are ongoing issues that require and still do require focus, and challenging. It's all very well us being free of some of the most pertinent restrictions in the United Kingdom, but we always know that the threat of a news story could send the government into hysteria. So we must not rest on our laurels. Yes, we must move forward with our lives. That's the message that we've been sharing since the very beginning. But in terms of government policy, it's important to remain vigilant. Similarly, we are looking for that kind of clear water space where we actually do move on from COVID-19. It does feel like there are a lot of people standing to gain still from COVID-19. In fact, the Zoe app this week, it was shown that the funding from the UK government is stopping for the Zoe app. So now they are seeking self-funding. But of course, you could argue on one hand that level of surveillance is useful, but there are, of course, the ONS, you've got the government reporting. So it's clearly the Zoe app, whilst it's played a role in providing data, there is an element of this now where people just need to recognize that making money out of these situations is got to come to an end at some point. But big pharma isn't quite ready to let go. Other institutions aren't ready to let go. But the old adage of follow the money is still playing out. That's at least me coming from skeptic corner, at least, or common sense corner, you could argue. Now, we are looking for that place of clear water where we do finally let go, however, in order to start to do a proper exercise when it comes to inquiry and reform. I personally, and through my organization, wish to continue the journey to its completion through ensuring that the national and international public inquiries into the handling of the pandemic are using the appropriate terms of reference and examining the issues from the appropriate lenses. We know that the default and de facto position will be that we didn't lock down early enough or hard enough. These are the things that are going to be under the microscope from the government's perspective, and indeed from some of the public quarters. But of course, everything we've covered here on the Pandemic Podcast the last 2 years shows that there is a much broader and more important realm of investigation and inquiry that will be required. So it's my goal to play a function in forming through our organization a pandemic reform committee, or something probably a little bit more excitingly titled, but title aside, contributing to the frameworks of the public inquiries at a national and international scale, and of course pursuing things around pandemic preparedness. You may have seen once again the stories of the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty being forth by the WHO, which we covered on the podcast for the first time in December 2021, has reared its head again. It seems that the process for that treaty is being pushed back to August, but it's offering powers not only through the WHO, but also creating regulatory reform that is quite damning in terms of legitimizing what we've witnessed over the last 2 years. And many other scientists, Jay Bhattacharya, if you watched the broadcast this week, have concerns about that, as do I. So there's work to be done in terms of that pandemic treaty, but more broadly and more importantly, there has to be some form of regulatory reform off the back of this. With the undue influences of big pharma, the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the way in which that the pandemic has been managed for a very myopic perspective of cases, only looking through the lens of a particular narrow focus, not taking a holistic viewpoint. All of these things must be reviewed and ensure that proper preparedness is put in place on a much more holistic manner. But also in ensuring that we see a level of regulatory reform off the back of this, because the pharmaceutical development of treatments, or more importantly, vaccines, is too intrinsically linked to the overall process. The monetary cycles are too intrinsically linked to the overall process. But not only that, the development and the approval are intrinsically linked. It's inappropriate that the approval of vaccines and the monitoring of vaccines and safety is undertaken by bodies that are supposed to be independent, but are intrinsically paid for and funded by pharmaceuticals and monitored by government bodies. So the incentives are perverse. This is surely something we need to see changed in the wake of COVID-19. And again, this is something I would like to play a role in bringing an organization together that can tackle these issues, but also look at wider conflicts of interests, that the philanthro-capitalist nature of some of the interests that we've seen in the last 2 years, really trying to remove the financial interests from global crises like this. It's a strong battle to take on, but off the back of this, as many people will crack on with their lives, I want you to be assured that there are many of us who are clubbing together to ensure that this does not happen again in the same way that we've witnessed. And of course, there's an opportunity to reevaluate and advocate for the reform, or indeed the replacement, of the WHO with a more decentralized solution. The WHO has not only failed within the last 2 years to play an adequate role in actually providing sound health information, but taking that broader view that we've just touched upon. But beyond that, there's been much criticism of the role of the WHO in the past decade and beyond. And it's time for change. It really is time for change. And many of us are recognizing that, looking at the bigger picture, the role of centralized institutions are part of the problem. So actually pursuing some form of decentralized approach when it comes to healthcare and health prevention and health treatment is, in my view, required. And lastly, but not exclusively, biosurveillance, putting the right to privacy back in the hands of the patient. We've seen a worrying trend towards biosurveillance. Yes, there is an important nature in terms of tracking potential pathogens that could be a threat to humankind or the world. But the way in which we've witnessed this surveillance culture unravel and affect our liberties and our privacies, this is something that really must be kept in check in the wake of COVID-19. So there is going to be the need for a pandemic reform committee. We've formed a new organization in order to tackle some of these things, and looking to create global coalitions in order to continue this journey. So to answer the question, where do we go from here? Well, the first answer is that the work around COVID-19 really is only just beginning. I'm saddened in some ways to see people's attention waning from this, recognizing that we've come so far, particularly those that have been active in the freedom movement. I do understand that people want to get on with their lives. I do too. It's a mental drain. But the reality is, if we don't do the hard work now in the wake of COVID-19, then, lo and behold, we'll see the same problem. Well, we could still see the same problem unfolding with COVID-19 again, based upon what I've shared you at the beginning of this episode. But more broadly, when there's future threats again, if we follow the same playbook, then I can only see the situation getting more bleak than what we've witnessed in the last 2 years. So there is work to be done, and I invite you on the journey. This is not a time to check out. This is a time to check in and recognize your role, all of our roles in creating change in the wake of this situation. Now, I want to comment on the bigger picture before wrapping up this episode, because it's important to recognize the technocratic trajectory that has underpinned what we've seen in the last 2 years. The centralization of power of control, as I've mentioned, has played a key function in that. The rise of authoritarian governance, the dominance and role of the public-private partnerships that have been advocated for by organizations like the World Economic Forum. They've been working on this now for decades, and to be balanced, the role of public-private partnerships there is a need for those elements. However, the way in which they currently unfold, putting profits above all else in the guise of doing it for social good, is just something that really does need to be challenged. We've seen the broad erosion of civil liberties and human rights, and the extension of that. That's something that we witness countless times in history when we see a crisis. And of course, we bounce from one crisis to the next. That continued erosion of civil liberties and human rights can be expected and anticipated unless we intervene. The lack of government accountability, scrutiny, and transparency is a common function here. The erosion of democracy, the rise of authority, in alignment with that rise of authoritarian governance. So we've seen, on one hand, the role of corporatism, the elites, the public-private partnerships playing a dominant role. Yet similarly, we're seeing the deterioration of civil participation and engagement in terms of challenging these things. So it's important that we work hard to invite people to become active participants in change, and not just passive observers of the issues that the world is presenting us with. We've seen a massive loss of trust in institutions, everything from media to science to public sector institutions, governments, and this is a challenge for the very fabric of social cohesion. We've seen the suppression of a free society from both the suppression of free speech. We've witnessed the cancel culture rising and continuing to rise. We've seen the suppression of protest, the right to protest, and even legislation being passed that further pushes this challenge on our freedoms into the ground. From the online safety bill in the UK, the police bill, which threatened both freedom of speech and the right to protest, but similar bills passing around the world. We've seen the emergence of a surveillance state. We've talked about the biosurveillance, but it'll be extended beyond that. And I touched upon the collapse of social cohesion and the widening of economic inequalities. This is before. Sorry, Friday afternoon. I'm so sorry to go into this bleak reality, but this is the trajectory that we're on, and that many people are just checking out. We've seen people unsubscribe from the Pandemic podcast, tune out from the content, which is fine. I get it. I understand. But my plea to you is continue to pay attention. We can't have our awareness raised to these issues and simply move on with our lives if we wish things to change. I kind of pull my hair out thinking, what's going on? I appreciate COVID is kind of beyond the news, although it's still there, as I mentioned. I don't see how we can all collectively go through we've got through in the last 2 years and not pay attention and continue to pay attention about how we can actually change things. The hard work begins now, and I invite you to be part of that change. I feel very confident, and I feel very inspired, and I feel very excited, despite everything that's going on in the world, from one crisis to the next, where it's impossible not to get stressed out and depressed by the news if we're consuming too much of it. The reality is conflict, and hearing the prospect of World War II and nuclear disarray is challenging. There is real issues in the world, but there are in alignment with these issues, there are issues that we have the power to change. And it's important now that we recognize that the systems and structures of power that have led the past are not fit for tomorrow. Neither are the leaders that serve our planet or the people. So it's in our hands to change it. So where do we go from here? Well, number one, we have to recognize and raise our awareness of the issues that underpin what we're witnessing in the world today, everything from the last 2 years, but now also recognizing the same patterns in the fog of war are playing out. I certainly want to live in a world that is free from conflict and live in a world that is pro-peace, that is for peace. I want to see a unilateral declaration of peace. I want to see the end of this warfare, but I also want to see the end of all the craziness that underpins it, the free speech, the suppression of free speech, the singular narratives, the oversimplification of the storylines, and the misinformation and misrepresentation in the media. All of this is continuing it now into a global conflict. And to say this doesn't undermine the realities of what we're facing, but it does paint a picture that the patterns that we've witnessed, the power grabs, the economic and political agendas are doubling down off the back of this. We have to change our course. It feels like, I really feel like we're entering into spring, but we're still in this dark winter. So the question is, where do we go from here? Well, let's go into spring, but let's make it a bright spring. Let's actually advocate for peace. Let's stand up for our freedoms. Let's seek to become active participants in change. Let's become transformational leaders of the future. Let's stand up for the generations to come. Let's stand up for our rights. Let's stand up for our freedoms. Let's stand up for peace. Now is not the time to check out. Where do we go from here? Well, we've got to make sense of the world. We've got to come together to make a shared understanding. When our trust in institutions is lost, we cannot trust what we see in the media. We have to take it in our own hands to make sense of the world. But we can't succumb to the stress of everything that comes with that sense making. We must spend 10, 20% of our time maybe making sense of the world. But we've got to tap out of that and come back into action and recognize that we have a role to play, both in terms of personal transformation, working on ourselves, working on our inner game. In order to become the change that we want to see, we have to become leaders of change. And in order to do that, we have to confront our own frailties. We have to confront our own challenges. We have to confront our own biases. We have to confront our own limitations and push beyond those and transcend them and actually become more effective, more resilient versions of ourselves so we can tackle these issues. It's no easy task, but the good news is life is showing us the path. Life is showing us the way. History shows us the way. And in fact, there is a path of personal and spiritual transformation that we can go upon here. And I believe this is the journey we're being invited upon right now, is to self-actualize our potential. It is to realize our spiritual path. It is to recognize that it's down to us to find united polarity and transcend our differences to actually come together now and transform the world around us. So yes, it's a path of sense making. Yes, it's a path of personal transformation, spiritual development, but it's also a path of social and structural transformation that lies in our hands. This path of decentralization, really, it's all about taking the power away from the systems and structures and putting it back into our own hands. Over the years, we've just seen this widening of the gap. It's time to close the gap, my friends. It's time to hold the line, and it's time to take the power in our own hands to shape our future. Do you want to live in a world where our freedoms and our rights are suppressed, where we're witnessing conflict on a global scale? Or do you want freedom, peace, prosperity, vitality, truth, and courage, and the ability to live with happiness and joy, and find that vibrant joy de vivre in our lives again when we're just witnessing this one crisis to the next? Man, it sucks. It does. It's real. It's here, though. It's here, and it's in our hands to change. So where do we go from here? Well, we don't... I believe those of you who have been on this journey don't have the opportunity to check out yet. The Matrix present us with the red pill, the blue pill. My view is, once you can see what's happening in the world, it's very difficult to let go. It's very difficult to unsee what you've seen. And there are so many of us now that are witnessing that the same level of thinking, the same leaders, the same structures that we've witnessed over the last decade and beyond are not fit for purpose for the next generation. We are the next generation. We've got to turn things around. We've got to take the power in our hands, and we've got to be the ones that create change. So where do we go from here? Well, I've just launched with my team an Elevate Network. It's the place for us where we seek to elevate humanity. We want to lift ourselves up, literally lift ourselves up out of this, and also to enrich the world. It's to enrich humankind. It's our opportunity now to free humanity, to pursue freedom, peace, vitality, prosperity for all, and to co-create a better future, to review how we can decentralize the systems of power, to build resilient communities, and to become the fullest versions of ourselves and embrace a vibrant future. It's the power to do so is in our hands. So I understand how some people just want to get on with their lives, and actually getting on with your lives in many ways is important. However, to do so coming from our best selves, to do so by being a reflection of the change we want to see in the world, and to do so by collaborating with others and co-creating a much, much better future. Because otherwise we're just going to be at the victim of circumstance and at the cause, and not at the effect. At the effect, sorry, and not at the cause. The cause is down to us. We are the cause. We are the change. It's down to us to transform the world around us. So where do we go from here? Forwards. It's time to spring forwards. It's time to elevate humanity. It's time to, yes, pay attention to what's happening in the world, but in many ways it's about tuning out and tuning into our own potential and rising up and becoming the change we want to see. That's my call to action here on Friday night. Yes, there's a bleak world out there. There's a dark winter, but it's time to spring forward. It's time to bring the light. It's time to change. The power's in our hands. Where do we go from here? Forward, friends. Forward, forward. And let's build a better world. So things are changing here for us. Where do we go from here is the question I'm asking myself as well as on my team. We're gonna, we've ran with this pandemic podcast brand now for over 500 episodes. We are going to be. You'll be seeing some changes to our branding. We're going to be bringing the Elevate brand to the podcast. I'll be doing some solo stuff in my own name as well. So watch out for those changes. But I invite you to please, we've still got our old branding for now, but it's going to change. But go to danjgregory.com/pandemic. Join our mailing list. Keep in touch with what we're doing. I've made a commitment. I'm just going to live the rest of my life in pursuit of change and transformation, personal transformation and social transformation. I'm going to play my part in making the world a better place for my son, Zach, and for my family and the world around me. It's down to us to make that commitment. I invite you to make that commitment and start by taking small action, subscribing to our mailing list so you can be part of our community going forward. And speaking of which, join us inside the Elevate Network. If you haven't, 3,000 people have recently joined. people who are commitment like you and I, committed to making a difference in the world. It's a place for us to share ideas. It's a place for us to challenge ourselves. It's a place for us to grow. It's a place for us to go beyond our limitations. It's a place for us to go beyond our silos and actually welcome in open arms with united polarity, a shared reverence for humankind, with a desire, a similar desire to make a change in the world. So join us at weareelevate.org. You can join our private community. We're massively looking to expand our work to actually do some of the things I talked about in terms of post-pandemic reform, but really double down on creating resilience. We've got financial challenges coming up now in terms of the global picture. We want to help people prepare for that, but become proactive. And we're building a solid foundation in order to tackle these things. And we need your help. If everyone who watched the pandemic podcast over the last 2 years and joins our community can find a way to contribute either financially, so we can expand our team. We're running at a loss at the moment, and we need to change that trajectory in order to we're only just getting started. It's expected. We're just building a new organization, but we need your support to keep going. I'm committed here to this long-term change. Our team are committed. We need your support, or if it's your time, your efforts, your attention, your action, however you can contribute, we need your support in order to transform the world. And we're building an organization to help to do that, and to rise up in the wake of COVID-19 and to alter the trajectory in the midst of all the chaos that's going on in the world. Let's find certainty and bring that certainty to the world and actually start to lead the pathway to change. That's our intention within Elevate. You're invited to join us there. It's a global platform. Come and join us at weareelevate.org and be part of the change. All right, my friends, Friday afternoon. Let's raise the nation. Let's leave on a high. Go into the weekend with a smile. It's down to us to be the change we want to see. People are struggling out there right now. Let's be a beacon of hope. Let's raise the energy. It's down to us to create the change. And start with a smile. Start with gratitude for everything that's in your life right now, because some people out there are facing challenges that we could never imagine. It's easy to sit on the sidelines from here in my home in Bristol, and where there's no bombs, there's no guns firing here. Some people are going through hell right now, and it's important that we hold this space for people. Let's bring peace to the world through our actions. Let's be a beacon of hope. Let's stand for truth, stand for freedom, stand for peace. It's in our hands to help support change. All right, peace and love to you all. I'll see you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in.